afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Florida Man Presents Florida Man. I'm Travis Puterbaugh, the curator of collections here at the History Center. I'd like to welcome everyone here joining us in person and also everyone joining us in the live webinar. I'll make sure to leave some time at the end for questions. And for those of you joining us online, feel free to leave questions and comments in the chat, and Katie can relay those to me. As the title of today's program conveys, I myself am a Florida man who will be presenting on Florida Man. I was born and raised in Polk County, itself home to the black sheep in Florida Man's family lineage, Polk County Man. But we're not here today to talk about Polk County Man. We're here today to talk about the phenomenon which you are all no doubt familiar with, Florida Man. I wanted to open the presentation with a quote from a movie which I feel helps explain at least some of why Florida Man exists, or at least why Florida is such a magnet for strange stories and characters. I hate cul-de-sacs. There's only one way out and the people are weird. If you look at the state of Florida on a map, you notice that it looks somewhat like a cul-de-sac, with Lake Okeechobee serving as the roundabout near the southern end of the state. Florida is surrounded by water on three sides. To get out of this state, you must go north. We are all trapped down here. The people are weird. This is a part of living here in the Sunshine State that we all just accept as fact. So, who is Florida Man? First of all, Florida Man does not even have to be a man. Florida Man is an archetype that extends to women as well as gender nonconforming individuals. Florida Man most certainly is a media creation, due in great part to public records laws which grant easy access to arrest reports and mugshots. Florida Man is a cottage industry for the media looking to generate clicks on stories with outlandish headlines. Although many single out the creation of the @FloridaMan Twitter handle in 2013 as the birth of Florida Man, the phenomenon goes back further to the website fark.com, a news aggregation website that began posting links to stories about the wild and outrageous things that seemingly only happen in Florida. That inevitably led to the Florida Man headlines. What many around the country who enjoy laughing at these stories may not realize is that Florida Man has existed for as long as there has been a Florida. Historically, Florida has been the last refuge of rogues and scoundrels looking to make a fast buck. It has been the end of the line for characters who might not otherwise flourish if not for the blessings that life in Florida has to offer. We will hear about many of those people today. Florida Man can be anyone. It can be your next door neighbor. It can be your coworker. It can be a family member. It can be you. We are all just one bad decision or series of bad decisions away from becoming the next Florida Man. The phenomenon of Florida Man has firmly taken hold in popular culture. Presented here are a few examples. There is a Florida Man coloring book, a Florida Man party game for adults. The Blue Oyster Cult recorded a song called Florida Man on a recent album. There is a conservative-leaning talk radio station branded Florida Man Radio, a Florida Man bar crawl here in downtown Orlando, and naturally, a Florida Man craft beer. There are many more examples, such as plays that have been written and even a television show currently in development, which focus on the phenomenon of Florida Man. The internet and social media have daily reminders of Florida Man for those who can't consume enough of it. The sad reality is that Florida Man can be an exploitative industry. Oftentimes, the people featured in these stories suffer from mental illness, drug addiction, PTSD, or are homeless. Other stars of the genre simply make terrible life decisions. The point of today's presentation isn't to point and stare at the people who have brought so many of these stories to life. What I'd like to do is show you examples of how the idea of Florida Man is not a new one. Strange things and strange people have been populating Florida for as long as people have inhabited this space. Today, you will hear about a few of those. Also, each of the stories I will tell could fill an entire lunch and learn on their own. So just by the nature of this hour-long presentation, these are not comprehensive histories, but I will encourage you to Google at will afterwards if you wish to learn more. The first tale of Florida man I'd like to share with you today concerns one of the best names you'll ever come across, Gregor MacGregor. If you have ever visited Amelia Island, you may be familiar with this name. Maybe you even played the miniature golf course that bears his name. If not, you are in for a treat. The story begins in Amelia Island, the northernmost of the barrier islands on Florida's Atlantic coast. In 1817, though the island held a small English population, it was still recognized as Spanish property. During its history, a total of 8 flags have flown over Amelia Island, more than any other location in the U.S., and I will soon tell you the story about one of those. In her book, Florida, Land of Change, Dr. Catherine Abbey Hanna says, one of the havens of shady enterprises was Amelia Island, which since the activities of the East Florida Patriots had become the home of British adventurers, Spanish insurgents, privateers, slavers, and other worthies. She did not also call it a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but you kind of get the idea. In June of 1817, a Scottish soldier of fortune named Gregor MacGregor appeared on the scene. Born in 1786, MacGregor left school at 16 to join the British Army. Eventually, he was removed from his unit and enlisted his services to South Americans fighting against Spain. He earned distinction from Venezuela with the Order of Liberators Award, a medal given only to the most significant of revolutionaries. A distinguished veteran of Simon Bolivar's army, MacGregor had been commissioned by deputies of Free America to liberate the Floridas. His commission had been granted in Philadelphia by agents of Venezuela, New Granada, Mexico, and La Plata, but financed by American money. Their goal, and MacGregor's, was to liberate Florida from Spanish control while absolving the United States from officially having any role in the operation. He only lacked men and supplies to complete his liberation. Setting a precedent in Florida for the next 2 centuries, MacGregor's fortunes turned on a shady land deal. He was able to successfully enlist investors for his mission by promising land in exchange for money and supplies. One firm in Savannah agreed to purchase 30,000 acres in Florida at $1 an acre upon the successful conquest of Florida. MacGregor was able to pull together 2 small ships and 150 men, mainly from Charleston and Savannah. One of his investors from Savannah visited Amelia Island in advance of the invasion, strongly advising island denizens not to resist due to what he led them to believe was a force in excess of 1,000 men. The Spanish garrison Fort San Carlos at Fernandina comprised a mere 54 men. On June 29th, Amelia Island was overtaken by a band of pirates led by MacGregor, who referred to himself as Brigadier General of the armies of the United Provinces of New Granada and Venezuela. MacGregor landed 50 of his men, not the nearly 1,000 which had been advertised, just north of Fernandina. Protectors of the island offered little to no resistance, knowing well in advance of MacGregor's plans and fearing a massive invasion force. The island had been liberated from Spanish rule. The flag bearing a green cross now flew over Florida. Welcome to the Green Cross Republic. MacGregor issued proclamations, established a makeshift government, and continued to stir things up in North Florida, enlisting privateers to seize Spanish vessels and awaited reinforcements to eventually try and capture Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine. At the time of MacGregor's invasion of Florida, President James Monroe was negotiating with Spain to acquire Florida for the United States. MacGregor's ultimate goal was to push on to South America, promising his men glory in future battles of liberation. MacGregor's reinforcements never arrived, and with money dwindling and desire waning to take on the well-defended fort in St. Augustine, after 10 weeks, MacGregor's summer in Florida came to an end, and in early September he left for the Bahamas, never to return again to Amelia Island. But when he did leave, he had officially become a Florida man. In true Florida man form, a few years later, MacGregor would go on to devise a scam where he invented a country, deceiving banks, investors, the general public, and even European governments in a con so convincing that he is known as one of the biggest con men in history. Florida man dupes investors into believing he founded nation in Latin America, but that's a story for another time. Speaking of pirates, any conversation about Florida man would not be complete without acknowledging an infamous pirate who has grown in lore over the last century plus. A pirate so fearsome, so loathsome, so utterly and entirely invented that an entire industry has grown around him in Tampa. I speak to you of Jose Gaspar, who, if you are a movie buff, is somewhere between a combination of Kaiser Sose, the Dread Pirate Roberts, and One-Eyed Willie. If you have ever spent any time in Tampa, you know of the annual pirate festival known as Gasparilla. The celebration kicks off with pirates invading the city by water, and the mayor of Tampa turns over the key to the city to the band of marauders. A Mardi Gras-like parade ensues. Beads are tossed, drinks are consumed, and fun times are had by all. The Gasparilla name is attached as well to local film festivals, a distance classic, an art show, a music festival, and a college bowl game. Gasparilla is a huge part of the Tampa Bay area's identity and has been since 1904 when the first parade was held. So, what is the myth of Jose Gaspar? The most common tale has Gaspar being born in Spain sometime in 1756 and groomed for a career in the Spanish Navy. He became an officer, but lured by the temptations of fortune and wealth, embraced the shallow, but ultimately fulfilling, life of piracy, and sailed towards Florida. Gaspar and his crew then terrorized the Gulf Coast, burning, pillaging, and plundering everything and everyone along the way. Adding to his lore was a Spanish princess named Maria Louise, who he kidnapped out of Mexico and allegedly murdered and then buried on Little Gasparilla Key after she rebuffed his advances. In 1821, Gaspar went out in a blaze of glory. Florida man mistakes American gunboat for British merchant ship. An epic battle in Charlotte Harbor ensued, but the U.S. had too much firepower for Gaspar and his mates. Rather than facing capture, Gaspar tied himself to an anchor chain and dove into the water, ensuring his death. Many of his crew soon followed his example, and others later faced execution. Except there was one survivor who was sentenced to time in prison but eventually released. Juan Gomez, who drowned while fishing in the Gulf of Mexico in 1900, lived to the age of 122 and claimed to have served under Jose Gaspar and been this sole survivor. He spoke of his pirate experiences while working as a fishing guide in the Charlotte Harbor area. Who then was Jose Gaspar? The most likely explanation is that Gaspar was a composite of many different pirates who menaced the Gulf of Mexico. One can only speculate on the motivation Gomez had to perpetrate stories about the pirate Jose Gaspar. Regardless of his reasons, the stories caught on and were eventually circulated in newspapers and tourism brochures. Historians have spent countless hours trying to verify the existence of a pirate named Jose Gaspar. To this date, there has never been any definitive proof that such a person ever existed. But Travis, you may be asking yourselves, wasn't Gasparilla a real place and therefore named after Jose Gaspar? Tampa historian Rodney Kite Powell points to the presence of the word Gasparilla appearing on a map created in the 1770s on what is now known as Gasparilla Island on Boca Grande, where it is known that a Spanish priest called Father Gaspar, or Friar Gaspar, had once lived. Its naming well precedes the supposed life of Jose Gaspar. But as they say, never let facts get in the way of a good story. In 1904, a U.S. engineers employee named George Hardy, who spent time in both Tampa and Charlotte Harbor, heard the tales of Gaspar and almost offhandedly helped change the course of Tampa history. Louise Frances Dodge, the society columnist for the Tampa Morning Tribune, mentioned to him that the local May Day parade could use a little more excitement. Hardy mentioned this legend of a pirate he had heard, and suggested local men dress up in pirate outfits and invade the city as part of the parade. Thus, the Ye Mystic crew of Gasparilla, a new tradition, and a Florida man legend were born. After all, is there anything more Florida man than an outlandish, hard-to-believe story? If you have ever traveled south on Interstate 75, you may have seen signs near Fort Myers and Estero for the Croatian State Historic Site or Croatian State Park. You may even have wondered if there was some kind of connection to that other Koresh, David Koresh, the cult leader of the Branch Davidians whose compound was raided by the federal authorities in 1993 outside of Waco, Texas. Well, the answer is yes and no. The Croatian State Historic Site has nothing to do specifically with cult leader David Koresh. It does have something to do with a different cult leader, a charismatic man by the name of Cyrus Teed. David Koresh and Cyrus Teed both mixed science with religion. Each were obsessed with the Book of Revelation. Both had small but devoted followings. Teed was born in New York in 1839 and spent his life pursuing the utopian dream. He founded a religion, Koreshanity, that was based on several core tenets. Reincarnation and the value of communal living were chief among them, but Teed also had ideas about the earth as well. A veteran of the Union's Medical Corps during the Civil War, Teed suffered from a form of PTSD, and it was while recuperating that he developed some of the theories which would direct his life. Cyrus Teed conceived what would become Koreshanity in 1869 after experiencing a late-night religious vision in his laboratory. During what he called an illumination, he saw a woman who revealed to him a series of universal truths that formed the fundamental principles of Korean belief. It is unknown whether Teed's illumination followed being knocked unconscious by an electrical shock, as some say, or a period of intense meditation. Notably, Teed espoused a theory called cellular cosmogony, purporting that the Earth was a hollow sphere about 7,000 miles in diameter, and that the moon, sun, planets, and stars were all located near the middle of this sphere. The logic? God would not create anything that could not easily be explained or understood, such as the mysteries of the universe. Teed would have hated the James Webb telescope. Teed's charisma and oratory skills enabled him to assemble a core of followers in Chicago in the late 1880s, incorporating his organization there as the College of Life in 1886. Teed believed he was the prophet Cyrus, who had received knowledge which would allow him to lead people into a new age. He changed his name, appropriately to Koresh, the Hebrew equivalent of the word Cyrus. His sect became known by the name Croatian Unity, and a few years later began moving his followers to Estero, Florida, where he intended to establish the New Jerusalem. Teed wanted to create a megacity in Florida, a place of racial peace and harmony, with 400-foot wide city streets, elevated passageways, and up to 10 million residents. Pretty bold ideas for the turn of the century. It would be located in the center of the universe, Estero, Florida, where he just happened to have been gifted 300 acres of land from a homesteader named Gustav Damkohler, who he supposedly nicknamed Damfooler. With additional donations from his followers, Teed added 1,000 more acres to help build out his utopian vision. The city would be constructed by volunteer labor and would be pollution-free. His 250 or so followers were highly educated, cultured, well-off, mostly female, and not who you might call to mind when you think of cults or sects. Teed believed in equality of the sexes and offered women positions of power. Capitalism was evil, and communal living offered a better way of life. Once they began settling it, the little village along the Estero River grew to include separate male and female dormitories, a dining hall, cement works, a bakery, general store, printing house, sawmill, ice house, and much, much more. By 1904, New Jerusalem had grown to 110 square miles in size. Teed directed his followers to live lives of absolute celibacy, sever all family ties, and surrender all personal belongings. He had his detractors, among them the Tallahassee Sun, which said of Teed, "He is not the first rascal who has made religion a cloak for his designs against the property and personal liberty of others, but he is the only one now allowed to do business in Florida." As the Cretians grew and prospered, tensions arose between the unity and citizenry of nearby Fort Myers, leading to a brawl on October 13, 1906, in which Teed received several head wounds. His health declined following the fight, and some in the unity attributed his death to the injuries he suffered. Koresh died on December 22, 1908, and activity with the Koreshian unity was never really the same after that. Many followers expected him to rise from the dead, but that did not happen, and the local health examiner ordered that he be removed from the zinc bathtub where he had been sitting in suspended animation and given a proper burial. Author Lynn Milner, who wrote an excellent book on Teed and Koreshianity, said of the followers who fell under his spell, "Their story shows how unshakable belief can be, even when it runs counter to reality. Even when fact bleeds through, belief has the power to triumph." She continues, "We all know somebody, at least one person, who has gone in for some kind of belief that we thought was crazy, whether it was a political belief or a religious belief or a spiritual belief. We sort of look at them and think, I thought I knew you, but they've become a different person. So it's not just about these people who settled Estero. It's about how strong belief can be and the power of a charismatic figure." Does that remind you of any other Florida men you may have heard of? Our next example of Florida man is actually a Florida woman. The headline might read, "Florida woman goes postal, embezzles $32,000 from post office, frames and murders former coworker." Long before Casey Anthony's trial drew worldwide attention to Central Florida, another Florida woman went on trial and somehow found a way to beat the system. The case of LENA CLARKE in 1921 drew national attention to Orlando for both the salacious details of the case and the circus sideshow spectacle of the trial. In 1921, 35-year-old Lena Marietta Thankful Clark served as the postmistress of West Palm Beach. The daughter of a nationally known theologian, Clark seemed an unlikely candidate to be caught up in embezzlement or murder. An intelligent woman who at the age of 6 was reading books on philosophy, Clark was a devoted volunteer of the Red Cross, the Congregational Church, and she sold war bonds during World War I. Known locally for writing poetry and fortune-telling, she lived a low-key life working at the post office in West Palm Beach for more than a decade, side by side with her brother John Paul for most of it while he was the postmaster. He quit the post office in 1918 and then died in 1920 when he was bit by a coral snake. After his replacement resigned, locals rallied around naming Lena as the new postmaster, not an insignificant role for a woman at the time. Life took a downward turn for Clark after her brother's death and appointment to postmistress. On July 26, 1921, Clark sent $32,000 in cash to the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank for deposit. When the bags arrived, they were filled with some cash, but mostly mail-order catalogs cut to replicate the size of currency. Postal inspectors came down to West Palm Beach to question Clark about the theft. The investigator, who was a friend of the Clark family, offered her leniency if she confessed. Clark retorted that she was a superwoman with a mastermind, and she knew he was bluffing her. With the walls closing in on her, a few days later, on Monday, August 1st, Clark took a cab the nearly 200 miles from West Palm Beach to downtown Orlando, and under an assumed name checked into the San Juan Hotel on Orange Avenue. It was there that she met up with Fred Miltimore, a former co-worker at the post office with whom she had had an affair and who had once accused her of improprieties. Miltimore had left the post office and moved to Orlando, where he managed the Arcade restaurant on East Pine Street in downtown. Several hours later, Clarke paid a visit to the police station where she told Chief Vestal that a man she suspected of being behind the missing 32 grand was in her hotel room and that he had been subdued with a morphine pill. The chief sent officers to the hotel, but they did not find the man drugged. They found him shot in the chest with a revolver lying near his body. Clarke initially denied shooting Miltimore, but eventually confessed, saying that he would have blamed her for stealing the money and that she was trying to get him to take the fall for her by signing a letter of confession. Clarke was arrested and indicted for first-degree murder. Awaiting trial, her celebrity blossomed as she received gifts and fan mail while in jail. She recanted her confession, claiming that she had no memory of giving it. She also wrote a short autobiography from jail, which newspapers sold for 25 cents a copy. She changed her story about the money, claiming that a New York man named Joseph Elwell had stolen it in 1918 and that he loaned her $20,000 to cover up the crime. No one was able to corroborate this story, however, as Elwell had been shot and killed in 1920, and the money was found among her belongings and in her own bank account. Her attorneys eventually settled on an insanity defense, which Clarke played to maximum effect in court. At her 10-day trial, which began in November of that year, while in court, she often slept through testimony, and on the witness stand, Clarke gazed into a crystal ball and told of the many lives she had already lived. How she was once in the Garden of Eden. She had also been the goddess Isis, as well as King Herod's wife. Also, the inspiration for the Shakespeare character Ophelia in Hamlet. And at every stage, she said, Miltimore was there tormenting her. She predicted that she would be acquitted. She would one day serve as Vice President of the United States and eventually President, following the assassination of Socialist President Eugene Debs. Psychiatrists were brought in to testify as to Clarke's mental competency. 2 of them found her credible, while 1 other thought she was a psychopath who knew right from wrong. In under 3 hours of deliberation, an all-male jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. Many jurors felt that Clarke could not have pulled off the crimes without the help of a man. The judge committed her to the state mental hospital at Chattahoochee, where she stayed for less than 1 year. Clarke returned to live with her family in West Palm Beach, staying out of the public eye for much of it in the same manner she did before her brush with the law. And she died in relative obscurity in 1967, and the true motivations for the crimes she committed were never learned. They say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And thus, we come to the story of Florida woman ANITA BRYANT, whose crusades against homosexuality in the 1970s reverberate as much as ever in present-day Florida. As author Carl Hiaasen described the moment, a dash of sex, a sprinkle of the U.S. Constitution, and a concentrated dose of Bible-quoting singer make for one of the more bizarre political stews in recent history. On January 18, 1977, the Dade County Commission of Miami approved a law by a 5-3 vote that would outlaw discrimination in the workplace and housing markets based on a person's affectional or sexual preference. Dade County's civil rights ordinance already protected on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, sex, physical handicap, marital status, or place of birth, but made no allowance to protect discrimination against homosexuality. The new bill changed that. Miami resident and longtime Florida Citrus Commission spokeswoman ANITA BRYANT, a well-known recording star and beauty pageant contestant, registered her outrage with the bill by forming a group called Save Our Children and initiating a wide-scale effort to repeal the local ordinance. Essentially the face of Florida orange juice to the rest of America, seemingly overnight, Bryant became the face of an anti-homosexual crusade. How did this happen? ANITA BRYANT was born in Oklahoma in 1940, and by the time she was 8, had become a born-again Christian. Bryant aspired to a life in entertainment and was described as the Shirley Temple of the Bible Belt. She recorded her first song at the age of 13 and by the time she graduated high school, had been signed to a contract by MCA Records and won the Miss Tulsa contest, on her way to becoming Miss Oklahoma and eventually the second runner-up in the Miss America contest. For most of the 1960s, Bryant earned national recognition as a pitch person for companies such as Coca-Cola, Tupperware, Kraft, Holiday Inn, as well as the Florida citrus industry. She accompanied Bob Hope on USO tours, appeared on the Lawrence Welk Show, sang the national anthem at high-profile sporting events, and sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic at LBJ's graveside during his funeral. Her voice could even be heard at Disney World singing to the popular Orange Bird character. Anita Bryant, family woman, Christian, trusted corporate shill, supported a wholesome and G-rated image, which is what made her campaign against homosexual rights in 1977 so jarring to the public. According to Bryant, she based her opposition to the bill not as a blanket attack on homosexuality. She did believe homosexuality was an abomination under God's laws, but also believed in loving the sinner, but praying for their sins. Instead, she based it on a need to protect children, who she felt were likely to be influenced, or to use modern terminology, groomed by homosexuals. They can't reproduce, she said. They have to freshen their ranks, so they must recruit our children. Bryant described evil forces at work, disguised as good, who wanted to tear down the foundation of the family unit. The nation watched and waited to see how voters in Dade County would respond to the issue being put to a referendum. If such laws could take hold in Miami, what could stop them from inspiring similar laws in other parts of the country? As it turned out, nearly 70% of Dade County voters voted to repeal the ordinance. Bryant proclaimed that decency prevailed for normal Americans, or the normal majority. Emboldened by her victory in Dade County, Bryant increased her rhetoric and took her crusade national. But life for Bryant never went back to normal. Among a great segment of the population, Bryant had become a villain, and even in some quarters a punchline. She sparked newspaper headlines such as, "If you liked Adolf Hitler, you'll love Anita Bryant." She was lampooned throughout popular culture, in music, television, and film, and held up for ridicule by her opponents as an out-of-touch square, which was ironically the image that helped propel her to fame in the first place. In an infamous moment while at a press conference in Iowa, Bryant took a pie to the face from a gay activist. A clearly shaken Bryant then immediately began praying for the man to be delivered from his deviant lifestyle. Bryant's critics also called for the Florida Citrus Commission to cut ties with her as their spokesperson. The commission tried to distance themselves from her views, but knew that if they fired Bryant for her beliefs, they would alienate an even larger segment of the population than the ones already calling for boycotts of Florida orange juice because of their association with her. Orange juice had never been more politically divisive than in the late 1970s. Although she would earn Good Housekeeping's Most Admired Woman in America honor for 3 years in a row, Bryant's career and personal life suffered. Bryant's marriage ended, and she went through multiple bankruptcies. She was dropped by her booking agent, and the Florida Citrus Commission moved on from her as a spokesperson in 1980. Bryant kicked a hornet's nest, and in doing so motivated a movement that endures to this day. Although she won a battle in 1977, it came at a high cost for Bryant. The ordinance she helped repeal was restored in 1998, but as residents of this state know all too well, our rights are always in jeopardy from Florida man and Florida woman. If you lived in the Tampa Bay area during the late 1970s and early 1980s, there's a very good chance you will remember the name Jean Holloway. The flamboyant restaurateur captured newspaper headlines and then diners at his over-the-top restaurant, the Seawolf. To believe it was to see it, but the Seawolf is not what Holloway is best remembered for today. No, Holloway holds a truly special place in the annals of Florida man lore. Born in the Sulphur Springs neighborhood of Tampa in 1937, the man once known for his expensive cars, fur coats, and pet Bengal tigers came from humble origins, living in foster homes as a child, as well as in an old school bus. He joined the Navy at 17, and in 1958, as a 20-year-old, climbed Mount Erebus, the most active volcano in Antarctica, placing him among an elite group of explorers. After his Navy discharge, Holloway made a living driving trucks before becoming a seafood broker, the first big step towards his career in the restaurant industry. He soon earned business with Red Lobster, Morrison's Cafeteria, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the Florida department store chain Moss Brothers. By the time he turned 35, Holloway had made his first $1 million. Holloway became an aficionado of the finer things in life: lavish homes, private planes, fast cars, faster boats, jewelry, and beautiful women. The child of poverty had it all, but kept his foot in the business world as a restaurant consultant before diving into that world with his own venture in 1977, the Seawolf. His first location opened in Lakeland, my hometown, and proved such a success that Holloway ventured to open one on an even grander scale in Tampa, near the Busch Gardens theme park. It would be 4 times larger than the Lakeland location, and he spared no expense with the decor. Named after the Jack London novel, The Seawolf, the restaurant decor featured an array of antiques, artwork, exotic animals, and the nation's largest collection of Tiffany stained glass, as well as 2 1,000-gallon aquariums. It was described as tropical meets British Raj meets overdone Victorian. Opening in January 1978, the new location made $1 million in sales during its first 2 months, and after 4 months, Holloway began planning for a $1 million expansion of the restaurant. In no time, it had become one of the most successful restaurants anywhere in the country. But Holloway wouldn't be a Florida man if this were merely a rags to riches tale about the American dream, now would he? Sales and popularity at the Seawolf soon tailed off. He lost interest in running the restaurant. Debts mounted. In 1980, Holloway announced he would run for president, emulating one of his heroes, Teddy Roosevelt. He never got on a ballot, but it kept his name in the press and garnered publicity for the Seawolf. The night after his wife, a former Miss Tampa, filed for divorce in April 1981, Holloway's mansion on Lake Thonotosassa burned to the ground, along with his Lincoln Continental. Investigators found evidence of arson. Prosecutors in his 1982 federal trial for arson and insurance fraud called it a crime of spite aimed towards his soon-to-be ex-wife. The jury acquitted him of the charges for lack of sufficient evidence. But let's go back a few months. In September 1981, Holloway supposedly disappeared while on a boat in the Florida Keys. The Coast Guard searched but could not find a body. Gene Holloway, from flamboyant restaurateur to drowning victim. Not so fast. 2 months later in Toronto, a man going by the name James LaRue was arrested on drug possession charges while carrying $270,000 in cash. Fingerprint checks confirmed that the man was Gene Holloway. He was never on the boat in the Keys, it turned out. Holloway had flown from Miami to New York City, then drove across the border into Canada. He might have been able to last longer in Canada, but it was not in his nature to live a low-key life. He attracted attention to himself, told conflicting stories about work he had done to his face, and made the unfortunate decision to take the alias of a man already wanted in Canada. So, to sum it up, in an 11-month span, Holloway allegedly burned down his mansion to spite his wife, faked his own death, traveled to Canada under an alias, had plastic surgery and a hair transplant to disguise his appearance, was arrested and returned to the United States, stood trial in an arson and insurance fraud case, and then a conspiracy to commit death fraud case. He earned acquittal in one, and then 3 months later pled guilty in the other, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence. Holloway was released from prison in 1985 and briefly returned to the restaurant industry before transitioning to a life in deep-sea treasure hunting in 1992. That's Gene Holloway, a Florida Man Hall of Famer. He loved it when you called him Big Papa. This was the nickname Lou Pearlman liked to be called by members of two of the most popular boy bands ever, who also happened to be his creations, NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. Right alongside Charles Ponzi and Bertie Madoff, Big Papa is among the greatest con men Florida has ever seen. Lou Pearlman was one of the biggest personalities and figures in Orlando for more than a decade. One might never have figured that a blimp and charter airplane operator from Queens would someday oversee an entertainment empire valued over $1 billion, but Pearlman's life changed in the early 1990s after a chance encounter with the New Kids on the Block. After chartering a plane to the New Kids, he wondered how they were able to afford to fly in that manner. When he learned they had made close to $1 billion in revenue from concerts, merchandising, and record sales, Pearlman realized he was definitely in the wrong business. He decided that he would move his business operations to Orlando and create a band to rival the New Kids. It was in Orlando that Pearlman created the Backstreet Boys with an initial investment of $3 million. Though the Backstreet Boys achieved breakthrough success in 1997, they were not an overnight hit. The band was formed in 1993, and Pearlman spent several years developing their talent with singing and choreography lessons, and sending them on tours overseas where they achieved their first bit of popularity and success. In short, he made the group look and sound successful before they even became stars. At the time of the group's formation, Pearlman shrewdly set up a shareholders agreement which designated himself as sixth member of the band, thus entitling him to 1/6 of the group's concert and merchandising revenue. He encouraged the group to sign management and recording agreements with his record company, Transcontinental, giving him 43% of the group's revenue for consulting services. Just as they hit it big in 1997, 4 members of the 5-person group sued Pearlman, claiming they had received less than $300,000 despite earning over $10 million. And despite the lawsuit, Pearlman had earned a reputation for success and had already been cultivating the next big thing, NSYNC, as well as several other boy bands, all based out of his production empire here in Orlando. NSYNC would eventually follow the Backstreet Boys in suing Pearlman for deception and cheating them out of money. Both bands would settle their lawsuits with Pearlman for undisclosed amounts. Yet Pearlman's reputation as a boy band impresario with cunning business tactics is not what we are discussing him here today. Like so many Florida men, Pearlman was a con man of the highest order. In January 2007, years and years of deception and criminality caught up with Pearlman, and he left the country just days before the state of Florida sued him for allegedly swindling 2,000 investors, mostly elderly, out of $317 million in a Ponzi scheme that lasted over 15 years. A dozen banks sued him for $130 million in unpaid loans. Pearlman's scheme went something like this. He acquired investors and loans for companies under his transcontinental corporate umbrella that only existed on paper. His airline, Transcontinental Airlines, not really real. He launched a scheme for investors called an employee investment savings account, promising a safe and easy return insured by the FDIC and backed by AIG and Lloyd's of London. The high-profile success of his recording empire lured in investors who were dazzled by the chance to meet members of the boy bands in person. As all Ponzi schemes require, Pearlman was robbing Peter to pay Paul and issuing falsified financial statements to cover his tracks, but eventually his luck ran out. Perlman fled the country for Europe and started living his life on the run. While in Indonesia, a tourist recognized Perlman from a story he had seen on television. The man contacted a reporter from the St. Petersburg Times, who notified the FBI of his whereabouts. Perlman, who had checked into a Bali hotel under the name A. Incognito Johnson, was soon detained by authorities and transferred to Guam before being sent back to Orlando to, pardon the pun, face the music in July 2007. Perlman later pled guilty to conspiracy to commit bank fraud, money laundering, and fraud in 2008, receiving a 25-year prison sentence and ordered to pay over $310 million in restitution and a $200 million forfeiture judgment. Though he showed contrition during his sentencing, Perlman never thought of himself as a true criminal, at least not compared to Bernie Madoff. He just let things get out of his control, he said, and Perlman died of heart failure in 2016 at the age of 62, after serving just 8 years of his sentence, with hundreds of millions of dollars having never been recovered. Our last story of the day is simply called Florida Men. There are so many things going on with this one, it was impossible to come up with a more accurate, easily explainable title. If you have ever seen the shows Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, you are familiar with the character Saul Goodman, a charlatan attorney who is not just a criminal lawyer, but is a criminal lawyer. Saul Goodman knows not just how to bend the law and make it work for him, but is an expert con artist who is not above using illegal methods to obtain information or desired outcomes. A real-life episode of Better Call Saul played out in a Tampa courtroom nearly a decade ago. The main participants were two Tampa-based, nationally known radio personalities, Bubba the Love Sponge Clem and Todd Schnitt. The two former co-workers had a long-standing radio rivalry, which resulted in a civil defamation suit being brought against Clem by Schnitt. The suit, which was originally filed in 2008, dragged on for nearly 5 years before going to trial in January of 2013. The details of the suit are almost incidental to this story, but for context. Schnitt accused Clem of false, highly offensive, and defamatory statements about him and his wife, Michelle. Michelle had one time worked as assistant state attorney to state attorney Mark Ober, who brought animal cruelty charges against Clem for slaughtering and barbecuing a boar live on his radio show. Clem was ultimately acquitted of those charges, but hard feelings remained both between the hosts and their loyal listeners. There's a lot more to it, so feel free to look up the case and enjoy everything that transpired between Clem and Schnitt. It was a very personal lawsuit, and those feelings apparently extended to opposing counsel as well. The law firm of Adams and Diaco served as legal counsel for Clem, while Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick represented Schnitt. One of Schnitt's attorneys, C. Philip Campbell, resides at the center of this story. Prior to the start of the trial in November 2012, attorney Adam Filthout of Adams and Diaco called his friend, Sergeant Raymond Fernandez of the Tampa Police Department, to let him know about a lawyer in his building who he said gets drunk at a restaurant across the street from their offices and drives home. He did not let Fernandez know that Campbell was serving as opposing counsel in an ongoing case. Fernandez set up a DUI squad stakeout outside of Malio's restaurant in downtown Tampa. Campbell was not observed driving that night, and no arrest was made. It was later revealed in depositions that attorney Robert Adams learned of Filthout's gambit shortly after it occurred, but no steps were taken to admonish him or prohibit similar behavior in the future. On January 23rd, with the trial already underway, Philip Campbell joined one of his law partners, John Ellis, at Malio's for dinner and drinks. At around the same time, Melissa Personius, a paralegal at Adams and Diaco, joined her friend at Malio's for drinks. While leaving the restaurant to go to another nearby establishment, Personius recognized Campbell, who was sitting at the bar. She later called Adams to let him know that Campbell was at Malio's, and she offered to go back. Adams relayed the information to his partner, Stephen Diaco, and Personius later returned to Malio's. In the meantime, Adams contacted Filthout to let him know Campbell was at Malio's. Then, just as he had done in November, Filthout enlisted the services of Sergeant Fernandez to set up another sting. The officer still was unaware of the circumstances which connected his friend with Campbell. For close to 3 hours inside of Malio's, Personius sat next to Campbell at the bar, openly flirting with him and buying him drinks. She never revealed her last name and claimed to work as a paralegal, but at a firm not involved in the case. While drinks and conversations were being had, Personius managed to exchange several dozen texts and calls with each of the principals from her law firm, likely providing updates on her activity inside the restaurant. Unbeknownst to Personius, Campbell lived only a few blocks away and did not even have his car that night. He planned to walk home and offered to call a cab for Personius, but she insisted that he drive her car. She did not want to leave it with the valet overnight, even though they said it would be okay, given her condition. Personius insisted it needed to be in a secure public lot where she could have access to it. Somewhat reluctantly, Campbell agreed to drive her car to a lot that was near his apartment building. The DUI squad was waiting. Almost immediately after leaving the parking area, Campbell was pulled over for making an illegal turn. He was investigated for DUI, refused a breath test, and was arrested. Unfortunately for the team at Adams and Diaco, the caper they set up began unraveling almost immediately. Campbell left his briefcase containing confidential information relating to the trial in the backseat of her car, and when her bosses knew it was there, they realized it needed to be returned to him immediately. But how could it be explained that they had possession of the bag for 18 hours? They attempted to have a taxicab driver return the bag anonymously, but by the time that happened, Ellis had figured out the true identity of Personius. Diaco used Campbell's arrest to make an offer of settlement in the case with Ellis. All bets were off, however, once Ellis realized Diaco's team had possession of Campbell's briefcase. This shameful legal episode resulted in the disbarment of attorneys Stephen Diaco, Adam Filthout, and Robert Adams. Justices of the Florida Supreme Court called it among the most shocking, unethical, and unprofessional conduct they had ever witnessed by lawyers. Not even having a priest appear as a character witness could save their careers. As for the case, jurors found that Clem did not defame Schnitt, though the victory came at an enormous cost to the attorneys who put their careers on the line in a scheme best left to televised drama. I just want to close this presentation with a quote from the Blue Man Oyster Cult song, Florida Man, which I referenced near the start of the program. Keep these words in mind as you consider the stories told here today. Don't you laugh, it could be you. The Florida curse always comes true. You can jeer, but you don't understand. Any fragile soul can be a Florida man. We have time for questions or wrap up? Okay. If there are any questions, Katie, or from the audience?
I got a question.
Okay.
How many did you cut out? How many more did you have for me?
Stories?
Yeah.
I could probably do this every Friday for the rest of my life.
Do it. Come back every Friday.
Someone on the web asked, are there any honorable mentions that didn't make the cut?
Too many to name. Let me see if I can. Charles Ponzi. I was going to do Charles Ponzi because one of his infamous schemes unraveled in Jacksonville He had fled Boston and come to Florida, sold plots of land that were extremely small. Then he was chased out of the state, arrested, and deported to Italy. So I considered Bernie Madoff another descendant of Charles Ponzi as well. His crimes happened in Palm Beach. There's just too many going through history. It was very difficult, but I wanted to have a couple representative examples of the different kinds of Florida man characters throughout our history.
Do you attribute some of this phenomenon to just the sort of migratory nature of Florida? Folks tend to be here from somewhere else.
Yes and no. Most of the people that I talked about in this presentation were from somewhere other than Florida. It doesn't absolve Floridians from their Florida manness, so to speak. Everybody's guilty. I think it's the fact that, as I alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, Florida is like a dead end. It's the end of the line. People come here escaping their lives in other places and try to reinvent themselves. And it's been a pattern historically. You could be from outside of the United States, you could be from any of the other 49, or a longtime resident and native like myself. It just doesn't matter. It's something in the air, it's something in the water.
Or when you live on a cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
The first one you told, Gregor, MacGregor, it reminded me a little bit of the Walker character that when he's like a Nashville, Tennessee, around the same time frame, and he declares himself president of Nicaragua, overthrows the president of Nicaragua. Do you know this story?
I don't know that one, no.
Okay.
Sounds interesting.
Only thing missing was he didn't have a little Florida adventure.
He would have done well here, I think. Anything?
No other questions from the web, just lots of sentiment that they want more stories. Maybe we'll have to make it an annual thing.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Supporting our program is one of the best ways to support the History Center, so we appreciate you being here. If you want to learn more about how you can support us and get involved, or just want to take a look at what we have going on, please make sure to visit us online at thehistorycenter.org. Again, I just want to thank you for joining us today and hope you enjoyed the program and look forward to seeing you back again soon. Thank you.